What's up, world? This is Raul with LiveLOUD coming at you guys again with another episode of Say It Loud. Last week, we took a break from releasing Say It Loud episodes, being that storytelling is such a huge aspect of what I do. But even more so, the reason why we tell stories is so that we can create the impact in the world that is needed. So one of the things I've enjoyed so much about Say It Loud is that I got to come together with people that I've met around the world, game changers, people who are creating impact, creating change in their communities and much further, and really hearing their story about what got them there, what was their journey. Now, given light with everything that has been occurring in our communities, we took a break last week because I wanted to create the space for people to really post what needs to be shared right now, with things that are going on in our very community, proposing the changes that need to occur. And so this week, I really wanted to go and focus on creating a space where we could come together and have these dialogues on what could occur from people who are creating impact in the community themselves. We're going to get into this a lot further. Today, my guest is Omari, who is a leader in one of the communities that I've been on. And I know his work is extensive with how can we create impact, creating dialogue, creating art, creating knowledge, information, channeling that energy towards where it gets to be directed, and really just doing things that I can't do justice with an introduction, man. So Omari, thank you so much for joining me today, brother.
Thank you for the invitation. It's an honor. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so why don't you go ahead and tell people a little more about who you are and what you do and how that shows up in our world.
Great. So my name is Omari Soulfinger. I'm a social worker, and before I was a social worker, I was a teacher. Before I was a teacher, I was learning how to do broadcasts for NPR. And all throughout that, I was a clown, burlesque dancer. I was an actor. I was standing up, doing stand-up comedy. And now I work for Theater Press, which is this methodology that came out of Brazil and really infuses a lot of my activism and advocacy with the creative energy, which I think is really important to keeping people's attention, and also not giving people answers, but just raising the right questions. In addition to Theater Press, I organize around police accountability and transparency, and what real healthy masculinity looks like. Because when men show up in their full sacred masculinity, they can help a lot of the things that, to be honest, men sometimes are causing. So yeah, that's who I am today.
Yeah, clown burlesque. All right, I didn't know this one.
Yeah,
we're gonna have to jump into that conversation a little deeper some other time, man. But yeah, I know that you have been nonstop with everything that's been unfortunately going on yet again in our streets, man, and everything that's occurring. You're not just going and taking protests, but you're also taking other approaches, because as we spoke about before, is not necessarily about taking a stand today, is the longevity and the systematic change or the behavior or the patterns that we could start inflicting this transformation so that something new can occur. And the dialogue is just so deep, and there's so many different ways and avenues that we could talk about this in the forms that need attention. So how is it that you're in action today? I know you spoke a little bit about it just now, but what is it that you're up to in regards to everything that's been going on?
Right. So what we're seeing right now, many people would say that we're protesting for Black Lives, we're protesting for justice for George Floyd, for Breonna Taylor, for Tony McDade, David McAtee, for 40 other people. It goes on and on and on. And that is what is happening. I also think that there is also just a general uprising to a lot of different things, one of them being police violence and the militarization of police. There would also be the inequity that we're experiencing. Because as much as that we can just group this as racism, in which I would argue it's more about anti-Blackness and white supremacy, this is not about a set of ideas or behaviors. This is around systems, institutions, and laws. And we can actually see, and we actually have data and research, right? This is about like, where does crime come from? Again, that we have research and really changing and stealing the narrative back. So it is definitely rooted in Black death, and I want to take a moment to honor that pain, and that the fact that many people can't properly breathe because enough is enough. And that we're really trying to change those systems, those institutions, so that we can actually have a moment to touch down to the humanity of many people who may not even have been caught on camera, right? Like we're talking about the ones that are caught on camera, but many people maybe didn't get caught on camera, having their lives stolen, and people who barely survived and who are traumatized by their experiences with police.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you're touching on this, man, because as we've spoken also before about this, people believe that these protests are coming because this one person passed away from an act from a police officer. And that's not necessarily the case. You know, it's not just coming from this single incident, but repeated incidents in many different spectrums, from physical brutality to systematic just structures that don't necessarily serve the majority of the population. In fact, it's intentionally not. And so I think there's a big misconception on what people understand is occurring out in the world right now. I think a lot of people have their judgments about how people are handling it and how they should be handling it, but without actually getting the full scope about what's been occurring. So I really love that it's not just coming with shouts and protests and a sign, but it's coming through dialogue, and it's coming through evidence and taking a look at what's been shown, and how we can start taking a look at these things to start just noticing the flaws, and how we could actually start to make some changes into that's going to ripple effect much further than today.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a saying that I'm very fond of, is that the revolution starts at your dinner table. You know, and also I want to say that, like, you have to be careful between adventurism and activism, right? And so there is something called a movement high, right? Like when we're in the streets and multicultural and lifting our voices together, and our sadness and our joy and our rage, and just being clear that this city is ours, that we can take it over, and that we give the power to all the systems. It's really beautiful and powerful, and I encourage people to do it, right? But honestly, I think the real long-term impact is the challenges and risks you take with the people you're closest with. The strategies that you use to get them to connect, to empathize, to notice the different things. And the patience that you have, that it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to just suddenly they're going to get it, but that you slowly build. And I also want to honor those people who have been disowned. That's some serious pain as well. And that's a sacrifice that is beautiful and should be acknowledged as well. So I value that stuff just as much as going out in the streets as well.
I was just having this conversation yesterday about what if every single person that can empathize, can understand what's occurring, what if every single person went home and had a conversation with their families, right? And had this dialogue. So one is acknowledging the people who take a stand, and also acknowledging the people that are willing to have this dialogue and to listen. You know, to not come with their prejudgments or their assumptions about what's occurring, but to really educate themselves. You know, I had a conversation with my mom who's been opinionated about something, and then I go into an explanation, not from a resistance place, not from a fighting you, but I want to go and explain and just broaden your perspective. And in doing that, they're like, yeah, I you know what, I completely understand that. That makes perfect sense. And it's not in a contrary or a fight against someone. It's just really embodying Black Lives Matter, you know, and it is really just acknowledging that. Like, I still don't quite understand what is so hard to comprehend for some people who are really against that. I get it. That's generational, that they inherited that stuff, they might be believing in stuff. But for those people who might be neutral, why is that such a hard apple to bite down on?
I think that I used to be ridiculously militant. And like, yeah, if you didn't think exactly like how I felt, there was no conversation. And I think where I've changed is realizing that the humanity of it is everyone has something to lose. Maybe some folks have more to lose than others, but that there's just a natural responsiveness that we're going to have when you're challenging something, and I might lose something, or you might be invalidating my experience. And having empathy towards that, I'm still pushing, echoing what the person said back so they can hear it in a different way, might be important. For a long time, we've talked about racism as something that happens to those people over there. And I think that is also where particularly people who believe themselves to be white, and I say it that way because white, much like black, much like brown, is an invention, right? But I think that's something that particularly has hurt white folks, right? The fact that when we say school segregation and that this school has no Black people here, we think about like, oh, and that's bad for the Black folks, right? But it's also bad for the white folks. They live in this oblivious world that they have no clue that what's actually real is that the world is diverse and comes from different cultures. And so it's actually hurting those children. Like that's a different way to look at it. You know, and so I think racism is so focused on who's on the shit end of the stick, but like it's also a lot to inherit this stick, to have it, to even ask for it, to hold it, and it comes with this illusion of this color, this illusion of superiority, this guilt, the shame, and then the natural things of denial and stuff. So I think that sometimes we get into duality, but like that's not as bad as losing your life or getting sent to jail or being marginalized in these schools. I agree. We don't have to get into the oppression Olympics, but maybe that is a good starting point. Because some of the strategies that you might use as an elected official, like we do, right, is the same thing you use with your family. Let's start with the starting point. What does that person want? What do they think is most important? And how do we speak to those things first before we get them to understand like how that thing that they want is connected to like what we're experiencing? But that's also really hard when it's obvious, like Black Death in the hands of police. So that's the other thing. I think people are also like, okay, like the moment that I had for Trayvon Martin, people are having with George Floyd, right? And so like oh, now you get it, right? But for Trayvon Martin, someone had it for Amadou Diallo, and someone had it for Sean Bell, and so on and so forth. And we can go all the way back to Emmett Till and even beyond lynchings, right? So there's also a part, Malcolm X, who, polarizing character. I don't know why. I do know why. But he also said, like, you can't be impatient with someone for not believing what you do now. There was a moment when you were ignorant as well. So that's a good tool to be like, they're not there yet. And I'm not going to give up. I'm going to be militant around my empathy as well, just as much as my rage, my joy, and all those things.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And I definitely want to create space in this conversation to hear about what we can do. And for it to tap into a diverse amount of people, because some people are built for the front line and some people are built for the homes and transformation, and some people are built to create a space for a stand and spark a conversation. So I think there's a wider range of things that we could all fit in how we could do our part to creating something that's just fair. Yeah. Just at the end of the day is just fair. And so before we get into that, man, Say It Loud is really about celebrating the stories or hearing about what were the moments that in our lives, whether that be a single moment I knew when I was 8 years old and it was just confirmed over time, or something that happened through triumph or struggle or whatever this might be. So why is it that you're here and doing what you do through your wide variety of ways that you show up in your world?
Sure. So I grew up in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. This was during the 90s. The crack epidemic was causing all kinds of family disruption and violence. I was not allowed to go outside, and I witnessed a lot of violence. I went to a community school, public school, which was was my joy. Between the school and church and community centers, they were like my safe places, my havens. And they equipped me to like pay attention to what's going around in the world. I remember a little boy that got killed for playing with a toy gun in his hallway. And they told us that. I might have been in first grade, and they like brought that in. And Amadou Diallo, so I was aware of all that. And then schools were so bad once we reached middle school and high school that my family moved to Staten Island to get to better schools. And they were clear while we were doing that. Like, we're moving because the schools aren't good. So this is the background I'm having. We get to Staten Island and it's like, Leave It to Beaver. Right? It's really like blew my mind. Like, I was just like, what is happening, And so there's a culture shock of like, people live very differently here. I'm very different. They're treating me different. They're calling me names that make me feel a way. I don't know why. Some of them I knew right away. I've been prepared. And some of those names I was just like, hey, Mom, the kids are calling me Jungle Bunny. Isn't that cool? And I had no idea. Right. And so needless to say, I had experiences there, racist experiences that I didn't know. But I also learned a lot about, I don't even want to just say white people, but people who are who are in a different class than I previously was, right? And I was included in that. And I noticed the change of like assimilating towards that culture and that style. And so that again was already, I'm like, okay, this is a very different experience, different life. 9/11 happened, and so I then in Staten Island saw the parallels of people, quickly going one way or the other and making me having to make a decision in that way. And I'm glad for teachers and different experiences that showed me to look at it from a different angle than what the news was showing me. I went to college and there was a recession. And so like I got to learn about the economy in different ways. And then I became a teacher and Teach for America, which that was like me enlisting and even being sent back to neighborhoods that I remember and like remembering how schools were important. I was kind of like, it's kind of crazy that like I'm a 21-year-old kid with no training, just drop me into this and like, we're gonna fix this problem. Like, what's the bigger thing? And why is this school entirely Latino? And why are these kids transient? Like a lot of these kids came from a shelter. And why is the focus so much on them passing the test? And so I kept saying, why? And then Occupy Wall Street happened. And it was the convergence of everything that I had experienced all at once. It was wild. At that point, I was a young adult. And so it was challenging and I felt empowered that this was my street, this was my block. And it gave me language that like, I could use. We're the 99%, we're the 1%. Later, I could read a book around like the US's wealth versus the world's wealth, but like it just made it was, I always say this, it was sexy, right? It was pop politics, which is what I needed at the time. And I spent a lot of time doing civil disobedience with them, which again, going back to my point earlier, there's adventurism, there's activism, and there's this high from like taking that, but then, later, eventually I found that like, that's not sustainable and that what's after the protests end? What's the endurance? What's the stamina for like incremental changes? I wanted the revolution to pop off. I was actually convinced that 2010, that was like 10, 11 years ago, I was convinced that we'd be living in a whole different type of society now, right? But incremental changes where like something like some burning would have happened if a bunch of young kids were doing 10 years ago. And so I imagine what's happening now in the streets in 10 years, what we'll see is candidates talking around like how much funding do we give to police and police violence, which is not often talked about on a federal level at least. And so, yeah, I did all that. And then it gets a lot. We don't talk about how organizers have been doing this every single day, and then this happens, and then people want to get into the game. And it got a lot. I saw a lot. I did a lot of cop watches, just surveilling the police to make sure we do things by policy, and also education advocacy. And it got really draining, and that's why I brought up the clowning lesson, where I realized like, oh, I want to be able to do these other things that's both healing and I get this message across.
Yeah.
That's attention grabbing. When you go to a protest and you see a clown dressed up like a cop, it's attention grabbing and funny and a little disarming, but you're learning something. When you go to a show, a foreign theater play about experiences of homelessness, or how people go from this classroom to prison, and it's just a show, but like you get to see something. I really think that that's what people want. I mean, most people get their education from television, like whether you think that cops solve and prevent crimes because you watch, SVU all the time and cop movies, or, you think something else. Most people in this, we're getting it from media. And so that's important because I don't judge people who don't read the books. An old comrade, but a colleague of mine, told me that he's from South America. And so he said that in his country, they'd had many revolutions, right? In his mind. And he said that it's always the same. The people who read the books go to the people who don't read the books and who are hungry and say, this is what we need to do. And so then the people who don't read the books go and fight and die. And then the people who read the books, they're eating and they're good. And then the cycle starts again and again and again and again, right? So it's just like, how do we also make sure to check that, like, I have privileges just merely from education, just merely from having a career that the people who I'm trying to organize and quote unquote save don't have. So I feel compelled to say, like, I'm living in my head when I tell this story, but the heart part of it is that, through that, there was moments where I was trying to commit suicide by cops. There was a thing in my mind where it's just like, hey, if the cops are going to likely kill me, you know what I mean? If the chances of it that I'll have an interaction with a police officer, or not even a police officer, a well-meaning citizen, and get killed because I look a certain way or act a certain way, then I'm going to bring the fight to you, right? Yeah. And so like there was a lot of that energy and, numbing my feelings, not allowing myself to feel that pain. Then I started to see the value of actually, let me know my council member's number. Let me call my council member. Let me not curse this white dude out. Let me actually try to get to know him. Let me organize my workplace. Let me organize my job.
Yeah.
And let me also stand up for things that, I'm not a trans man, but I should, if there's an issue were to happen to a black trans or any trans person, I would want to go as hard as I am for them, or for women, or for undocumented folks, or for disabled, differently abled folks. So those are things that happened when I think matured in the movement. But at first I was just trying to figure out why things were unfair for so long.
Yeah. Can you, if you don't mind, man, can you dive into more about that? Because I know you briefly shared about it before, about that type of suicide by cop, suicide by stand and stuff. Can you tell us more about that?
So this is my way of claiming back my life by even maybe playing with it, maybe being risk, right? Because there is a and maybe not everyone agrees with me, but like there is a feeling that you feel most alive when you're that close to death. You know what I mean? Like there's a reason why people do extreme sports,
right?
And I don't think protesting is an extreme sport. I think it connects to like one of the truest and realest things. It's like if you disagree, or if you not even disagree in the negative, if you really want something, you got to go out there and grab it. And that's the slogan that America teaches us, right? Like we got to go out and grab it and challenge that. If it's true that all the things that can happen here, we might, why can't it happen for me? If it can happen for that millionaire, if it can happen, like why can't it happen for me? But there came a time for me where I was, and I still am. I'm getting kind of emotional thinking about it. I am still very much ready to die for this, but I also want to live for it too. And I think that that's important too. Is self-care is revolutionary too. Taking a nap,
completely.
Just from gratitude list. These are things that I didn't do before. Like just being able to, I want to be out there now, right? But just being able to be like, hey, it's really thankful that I have a place to like rest and care for, and it's good that I'm here and I can call support, retail support for folks. So I think that's important, and it takes time.
Yeah, there's several things that you mentioned there, man, that I think are so fundamental and key. One of the things is to inform yourself. I mean, it sounded like, do you feel that when you got to step out of where you were born and were growing up to move to Staten Island, that it provided you with perspective and filters? And do you think that supported you in coming back and just evoking these questions on why do things function this way?
I mean, I gotta be honest, I think it's parenting. I really do think that I was lucky, and it's a privilege to have adults that were able to, like we talk about like, racism is not born, it's taught. And that's true, but you can also teach like obliviousness. You can also teach consumerism, right? That like getting these sneakers and getting money is liberation. I think that I have memories of my mom talking to me about Rosa Parks, right? Like I have memories of Spike Lee's Malcolm X being filmed in my neighborhood, and like that, me being like, what's that about? I had a cousin who didn't wear Reeboks. And he was like, because apartheid. I had no clue what apartheid was. I learned about that like probably 20 years after I heard that. So I think it was also like people around me living in their true self, living loud, right? Like I was lucky to have people who were living loud around me.
Right. Yeah. There's so the things that to really highlight about that is, one, to be informed. It's to educate yourself and to receive this information and being able to take a deeper look and to answer some of the wondering questions that you might have. And the second thing that I'm also hearing is check your sources. Yeah. Where are you learning from? Because there's so often that I think everyone's guilty of this, where we hear something and then the next moment we're having a conversation, someone's having a conversation about it, and we just pretty much blurt out the information that we received from this source. And that becomes now our belief system, because we pass it off as if it's our own acquired knowledge. And to really wonder, where did I learn this? When did I start thinking this way? When did I formulate that thought? And so aside from really educating and supporting yourself to learn about what's occurring in our modern day and where it comes from, but also like question the resources that we're actually hearing this stuff from, and to learn to have perspective and come up with our own conclusions from there.
I think there was an adventure of like having a question I hate, I'm getting older, so I hear myself trying to like do the generation. In my day, we didn't have Google, but it's true. We didn't have Google and we didn't have the internet. And so there was an adventure of like, if I had an idea or if I had a question, I had to go look for it. I also think someone encouraged me to do that. I don't know if it's because I went to certain schools that encouraged me to look for my answers, or I had family members that did that. But yeah, I had to look for it.
Right. And it is not just Googling and the first link or second link that pops up, it's to really, and I appreciate your sense of wonder, because when we question, it means we're seeking a conclusion, or we're trying to define already this final thought, but to wonder about it, like, why is it like that? And if we take a second for the people who have some type of trouble with the protests and everything, like, I get it, whatever's occurring for you, I get it. But let's step aside from that real quick. Why is all of this occurring? And how long have you sat with that question? How long have people actually sit down with the questions, why is this occurring? Why does this still occur? Why did this happen years ago and this is still continuing to happen now? What are people's argument, and what do I need to learn, or what can I learn about this? If what I mean about progression is actually about progress, if it's about, like, if we want to create an environment or a world where our sons and daughters can be in that harmony, then what are we allowing to exist in our reality? And I think a big part of that is, do we have the courage to actually wonder about that? Can we question that and wonder, or have those dialogues with people that can actually inform us about it before we jump to our own conclusions about what we think is right and wrong?
Yeah. I mean, I think it has a lot to do with school too, right? Like, I don't know, like history is also not, I worked in schools for a while. Yeah. I remember social studies lessons. I remember specifically covering moments. It was incomplete, but moments of American history, and incomplete around global history. And so, like, some of these things is also taught. I also noticed, I started teaching in 2008, and I probably stopped around 2012. Social studies completely disappeared, completely evaporated. And I think that's also where you start to go, but why? That's where the why questions come from. And science too. Science is kind of turned into STEM, which is like, this is to get you ready for a job, right? But science and social studies could be just like, you can ask why and look at history, or you can use this method, right, to discover the realness. You really could probably do a method around the scientific method around, like, why are Black men dying in police, right? And like, have your hypothesis and test it and research it and procedure. And I think that's important. But like, again, to me, it's like, what school did you go to? Like, really, like, who had access to go to certain schools, and what were they teaching? What were they required to teach? Right.
With this situation and everything that's occurring right now, I'm with you, man. Like, I think right now we need endurance. We need people to take a continued stance, because as I shared with you, my concern is that this week, next week, and maybe a trickle of the following week, our numbers are going to start depleting as a hype of it, because we as a culture are so desensitized in a lot of ways, and we're so easily distracted, that I want to create spaces where people can actually have something to support moving forward, and create a systematic change, or create some type of a stance, so that we could actually see that turn into flourishing, for it to actually occur. Do you have any words for the people that might be listening to on any level of the spectrum on how they could relate to this moment and what they could do?
Yeah, and I like that you said, it's not about what we like. I'm going to really try to phrase this as not a prescription, but what people need to be doing, because I really think that's also part of the problem, right? I think that people have to make choices on their own. So I'm going to try to do it as like right? So the I for me is, I watched the 13th Amendment. It's a documentary on Netflix. I started watching right around when Trump got elected. It then led me to the question of, how did all these police departments around the country become like militaries, like little like militaries, and what role do they play? And then start to think about the budgets of these police. And that also then led me to like, what is crime and where does crime come from? I'm under the understanding that crime comes from people trying to meet basic needs and mental health. right? That's my understanding where crime comes from. And greed, because I also, when we say crime, we're thinking a very specific type of crime. I would challenge that we're thinking about a very specific type of people, right? But I think stealing from retirement funds and stock market insider trading and predatory loans are crime as well. So let's say greed, getting your basic needs met in mental health, right? So then if I then think around, how does police help mental health? How does police help people getting needs met? And do police do anything about greed? Then that leads me to another question of like, okay, so then what are the needs people need? Housing. How are we doing in this country around housing and homelessness and rent and mortgages? Where can I put my work in there? Okay. And for who? Okay, so then schools. We were talking about schools. What's the state of schools? I know there's a lot of charter school stuff. I also know that school segregation. New York has the most segregated school, racial and socioeconomic segregated schools in the country. So maybe it's around teachers, or maybe it's around textbooks, or maybe it's around school funding, right? We can do food. We can do all kinds. We can talk about gun access violence, right? Because people like to say black on black crime, but there's white on white crime too. People just usually kill and shoot the people they know, but we like to talk about black on black crime. So I think that I would then decide for myself to do research, whether it's reading a book. Haymarket Books has really awesome books, or watching a movie, a documentary, and deciding for myself, okay, this is where I believe crime comes from, and this is what I believe the role of the police are. And then deciding, if you're not going to decide to meet one of those needs or advocate for those needs to be met for people who are not you or people who are you, then the other thing would be to ask yourself, how is police solving this problem? And can we maybe take some of likely the billions of dollars that you give to the police to other places? At some point, everyone's got to do some work. And I mean everyone, and I say this casually, but we all have been conditioned to think certain things. To what's normal is usually from a dominant ideology of one person's thing. And so we have to look at racism. If I'm as a black person saying that there's something wrong with black people, that's racist, right? I don't have any power, institutional power backing that up, but it's racist. And if obviously you're a white person who gets all the cash and prizes, the goodies, the immunity from the law, the mortgage, the jobs, the everything, the better schools, and you feel that way, okay, well, then you might have a problem. All right?
Yeah.
And then also, let's move away from black and white. There's the invisibility of Asian folks, right? They get to assimilate into whiteness and they're completely invisible, but they experience some things as well. Latinos, right? The invisibility of the kind of adoption into European culture, but what about the indigenous roots of Latino folks, or the Afro-Latino roots of Latino folks, right? But it's a long-term commitment.
That's really profound, man. Just because, as you're saying, it's a long-term investment, and the thing that pops into my mind is that if I become more educated and more informed and a broader perspective, and if I mean well, then that just arms me with so much more knowledge that I could teach to the people who are listening and following my guidance. So the people who have kids, and the people who are really to parents that really have their own opinions, to be able to sit there and have these conversations with your families. And it's not just one opinion versus another opinion, but to really expose yourself and immerse yourself with this information and knowledge, so that way you could come and spark a dialogue into having these things. I think that's really profound, because this problem, as we know, is not just going to go away. Mm-hmm. It's not just okay, well, it's fixed now, and America's forever changed. I think change, it comes in triumph of moments of taking a stand about what's going on necessarily out in the world right now, but it comes also on the individual level on what can we do and what do we partake in, what do we subscribe to, because it is dangerous for the world to just believe what you're believing if it's counterproductive towards the harmony that we get to live. It's not innocent to just have, okay, well, I have my opinion, but I have my opinion and that's it. If we're not informed, and if we just allow ourselves to kind of linger in that stuff, that could be a really dangerous thing.
I agree. And I think that's tough. I think that people are allowed to have their opinions. I think you just got to ask yourself, if your opinion hurts other people or yourself, then that's the one thing. And I also think that we have to be really graceful about our correctness. Like, I was not this person 10 years ago. I was way more militant. When you've asked me that question, I probably would have been to like something around how capitalism is terrible, which I do believe, right? Mm-hmm. But I want to be like graceful around my correctness. I want to be like, these are like, I made a choice to say, I feel. And if someone was like, I was saying, I believe myself to be anti-capitalist, but I have met people who've lived in countries with communist history and tell me about terrible things that have happened, right? And so like, I can't be like, I am correct and not invalid the experience. So like, there is a little thing about like, you will have your passions and your belief, but how can you stay by your principles but still be open to someone else's experience, which is not easy to do. And I would say on both right, left, up, down, it's not practiced very well.
Right. Yeah, I think that's really powerful, man. I want to hold on to that about, does my belief hurt others? And that's a really powerful question to just sit with, man. Brother, I just want to say thank you, man. I know, again, you've been really active with being out into the world, and I know we're far from done. And as I told you before, man, you got a brother here that, like, I'm down. Let's get some work done. We'll continue the dialogue about what that could transform and look like. But I really appreciate your story and your journey and your stand, man. Everything that you're up to is so monumental. Every single person who's so adamantly not just taking a stand out of emotion, but also from this sense of question on this belief of value of how the reality that we get to live, and really being able to take a stand for that, man. I know that we're far from done, and you're far from done.
Thank you, and thank you for taking a moment to have me reflect, because I could have came up here and spit a bunch of stuff of my solutions, but it was helpful to see that like I hadn't always thought this way. I do want to make a clean ask for, again, look into defunding police. Just look into it. Come up with your own opinion. It does not necessarily have to mean erasing police, but just look into like how much money we invest in police versus poverty, poverty, and that's it.
That's yes, for the people actually exploring that, because I know I've heard some people's argument. I'm like, defund the police, but if you get into trouble, who's the first person you're calling? Yes, I get that. I'm not saying let's take away the police system or doing any of that stuff as well. But if we see the opportunities or the flaws that are going on in our communities, and not just your community, because we're talking about a wider scope, right? If we're all Star Spangled Banner, for America, let's take a look at other communities and what's been consistently the pattern, the thread that's been going on, and the amount of veterans that are affected by it. As we said before, the homeless life, the educational system and the lack thereof. If we can inform ourselves with this, we could start seeing, okay, maybe we could make a little better decision that could be more proactive towards creating solutions rather than just continuing what might be a problem. Omari, thank you so much. Okay, where can people follow you if ask you questions or just hear about the stuff that you're putting out into the world? Sure.
So first, I want to do organizations. You can if you live in New York, you can follow Brooklyn Movement Center or Communities for Police Reform, and also Theater of the Oppressed NYC. And then if you're looking to just talk to me, I'm at Twitter at Soul, Soul, Finger, Finger, and Instagram, Omari, Omari Soulfinger. I'm going to plug in all that information below so that you guys could take a look at and just follow and just expand your comprehension about this, expand the dialogue, and really be part about the needed change that we need in our communities right now. This isn't by accident, everything that's occurring right now, and we should try to pay attention a little bit more about what we could take away from this and what we could step forward with. Omari, thank you so much for your time and your energy, man. Always appreciate you. And I really look forward to continuing this dialogue with you and seeing what change could come, man. Thank you, Raul. Thank you for allowing me to live out loud. I appreciate it. Absolutely. All right, guys. So for everyone tuning in, again, Say It Loud is really the narrative of hearing impactors around the world and the magic that they're creating, not just what they're creating, but also the stories that got them here, why they take this stance, and little nuggets of thought of what we could do moving here forward. So thank you guys for tuning in. We'll check in next week, and we'll send you guys much love. Peace.